One of the most powerful functions in Bricks Builder is the query loop builder, and that's exactly what we're going to focus on today. Now, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, let me give you a practical example before we move on and see how you can build these for yourself. This is a typical blog layout, but this could be an online shop using a tool like WooCommerce. It could be all manner of different things. Each one of these individual post items is referred to in this example as a card. So we've got the card itself, we've got the author, the date it was posted, the title, the description, those kinds of things. Then we're going to use the query loop function to loop through these based upon basic parameters, post types, taxonomies, and so much more. So as you can see, we've got multiple different cards all following the same design principle, but with different pieces of information. We can then click and do other things like go and take a look at the full post, or if we're using WooCommerce, look at the full product. So this is the kind of thing you're going to use the query loop builder inside Bricks to do. So let's take a look at how you can do that. But before we do, if you are new to this channel, my name is Paul C, and I've been a web designer and web developer for well over 20 years, working with WordPress for the best part of 10 years. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at how we can do this in Bricks Builder. Now, in the interest of keeping this video brief and focusing on the query loop, I've already done a couple of things just to speed things up. I've created a page inside Bricks. I've then dropped in a section and a container, and I've created a basic outline for a card. Now, we've already seen what these cards look like in the loop example I've just shown you, but let me just quickly say what I've got in here. We've got a heading, an image, some basic text, and a button. As you can see, this is what we can see on screen right now. This is all wrapped inside a standard block, and we're going to use that block to create the query loop. Now, these are connected up to dynamic data. In other words, this is connected up to the title of the post, the featured image of the post, and so on. Now, if you've never used dynamic data before and you want to get up to speed using this with Bricks, I've got this video here you can check out. It'll give you a good head start. And I will be covering dynamic data in more tutorials, specifically working inside Bricks. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe to be notified when they are released. Okay, so with that all said, we now need to invoke the query loop builder. Sounds complicated, but it's not. It's really simple. What we need to do is select the item we want to loop. In this example, we want to loop the card. So what we need to do is come over to the left-hand side, and you'll see we now have query loop available. Let's enable this. And after a second or so, you can see this now pulls in what it considers to be the default information. In this example, it's just our standard posts. And we can accept that, or we can override it and set lots of different things up. So now let's take a look at the settings we have to customize this query loop. All we need to do is click on this little query loop icon, and that will drop down all the options we have available. Now, the first thing is we've got the type. In here, we can choose from posts, terms, and users. So even though we're going to focus on posts in this example, the principles hold true depending upon whether you want to loop a term or user. So you may want to create a directory of all the users. You could do that from here. For our example, we're going to focus on the posts. We'll choose that option that says, what post type do you want to use? So if we open this up, you can see we've got various different types of posts. Standard WordPress posts, pages, media, and any. Now, you can also use this with custom post types. So if you've created your own custom post types, maybe for employees or testimonials or something like that, they will have options here as well. And this is something we will cover in future videos. But for now, we're going to stick with the native WordPress functions. So we're going to choose posts from our list. Then we can choose how we want to order them. So we can use any kind of data inside here to organize how these are going to be displayed. So for example, we may say we want to have these in alphabetical order of their title. So let's just do that. We'll choose title. You can see that now changes. So Vietnam, Switzerland, and so on. We can then choose the order, whether we want to have them ascending or descending. In this example, let's set them to ascending. And now you can see that changes the order of our posts. Now at the moment, everything is stacked one on top of the other, and this looks particularly ugly and not the easiest for you to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly make this look a little bit nicer before we move on. To do that, I'm simply going to choose the container, and from there we're going to set the display to grid, and we're going to use a really simple 2-column layout by using 1FR, 1FR. Finally, let's go to our gap, and we're going to set this to be medium. And now you can see this just makes a lot more sense. We can see what's going on a little bit better. So let's go back to our query loop. And again, you can see this shows you that you can come back and edit this at any time. So if you want to test things out, make changes afterwards, all those options are available to you. Now, the one thing I want to say before we go on is I'm not going to go through every single detail available inside here because A, I think it's overkill for a sort of foundation tutorial on how to get started with this, but we will be taking a look at a lot of these in more details when we take a look at creating more fully featured tutorials on various different ways of building websites. So you will be having those covered, just not necessarily in this specific video. Okay, so next up, we've got the posts per page. How many posts do we want to display? At the moment, this is displaying everything, which if you've only got 10 or 12 posts is not a problem. But when you have a lot of posts, you want to make sure that we don't have that overwhelmed and the page gets incredibly slow to work with. So let's set this to be 6. And you'll see now we've got 6 posts. We'll take a look at how you can add pagination and other options a little later. But for now, we're seeing the first 6 posts available. Next up, we've got an offset. Now, the offset is basically saying this is the query loop. Do we want to ignore the first X number of posts? So for example, you can see Banff Beauty is the first one inside our list. If we choose 1 from here, Banff Beauty is gone and it moves on to the next one. This is a great way that if you want to create a layout where you maybe have a different design for the first image or the first actual loop item, you could do that, set up a query for that, have a different design. You kind of get the idea. You can also set this to whatever value you want. So let's say we want to set this to be 3. And now you see Misty Lakes becomes the first item. The first 3 are being completely ignored. Lots of use cases where this is useful. You may have, for example, a single post template and you want that post to be displayed and then you want other ones inside that section for like related posts and so on. You could use an offset to do something like that. For this example though, let's just remove that. Next up, we've got the child of. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail with this because this is probably a little bit more advanced than we need to cover in this particular video. But imagine that you've created your post structure and you have parents and you have children posts. Well, what you can do here is you can choose what child posts you want to display from a particular parent. So it says children of a specific parent. So you may have landscapes, you may have seascapes, blah, blah, blah. And inside there, you may have subsection children. You could use this to choose what you want to display from there. Hope that makes sense. Then you've got ignore sticky posts. So if you set any posts as sticky and you don't want to include them in this, you simply check that option and any sticky posts will be ignored. Then you've got the disable query merge. Now this is probably a little bit more complex again, but what this effectively does is if this is not your main query, for example, you may have queries inside the footer of your website, you can choose this to disable the main query and therefore it won't have any issues if you are working with archive pages and so on. I would recommend taking a look at the documentation to get a better understanding of this side of things, but for now, we're going to leave that as it is because this is just a standard query loop inside a standard page, so we don't have any issues. Then you've got is main query. So this enables the archive pagination if it's not working. So if you were working with an archive or a search results page and so on, and you find the pagination that you create doesn't work correctly, you may want to enable this so you can control making sure that actually works and displays correctly. Next up, we've got the include and exclude options. This allows you to fine-tune what you do and don't want to include in any query loop. So for example, you may want to include only specific posts inside here. So what you can do is you can say, let's open this list up. This lists all the posts we have available, but we could easily search for these. So let's say we wanted Emerald Lakes. We can start typing. There we go. Choose that option. Now only Emerald Lakes is shown. Want to add another one in? We can click. We'll say Misty Lakes. Click again. Add a third one in. You kind of get the idea. Let's get rid of those. And then exclude does the complete opposite. So let's say in this example, we want to exclude the Emerald Lakes. Choose that option. There you go. That's now removed. And again, we can stack multiple ones here as well. So maybe Snowdonia Lakes needs to go. You kind of get the idea. Again, we can remove those. So you may have times where you want specific posts, you want to include them or exclude them. You can do that from here. Now, the exclude current post is more useful when you're creating something like a single post template. So you've got, for example, we could click on Banff Beauty and see all the details about that post and that location. And we may want to include additional posts that are related to it. Well, we could create a query loop, use that on the template, and then all we need to do is exclude the current post so that won't display the Banff Beauty alongside displaying it a second time in that queried loop. Again, hope that makes sense. But if you need to do that, all you need to do is enable this option and it will not display on the page. Next up, you've got your terms include and exclude. So this works in fundamentally the same way as what we have with the posts. This time though, it works with terms. And terms, if you don't know, are ways of organizing, categorizing the actual content of your posts, pages, and so on. So for this example, you can see we can open this up. We've got a bunch inside here. Lots of these to do with posts and so on. So let's just say we want to include just landscapes. So we'll start typing landscapes. You can see that filters it. Now we're only going to see those that are in the landscape category. And there you go. You can see these are all the landscape items. We may say we want to have something like just the sunsets. So again, we've got a category for that. We can choose that option from the list. And you can see that's just showing anything I've labeled as a sunset. The same thing then goes for the exclude. I don't think I need to go through this. It works in exactly the same way as we've already seen. Now, before we move on, if you are getting value from this video, why not hit that subscribe button down below to be notified when new content is added about bricks, web design, WordPress, and all those kinds of good things. Anyway, let's move on with the rest of the tutorial. Next up, we've got our meta queries and our taxonomy queries. This is where you start to get into the more complex functions available as part of the query loop builder. I'm only going to gloss over these quite quickly because, again, like I say, we will take a look at these in their own dedicated tutorials where they need to have more explanation given to them over and above what I'm going to do in this particular primer. So let's just briefly take a look at what options are available in these more advanced features. Let's add a meta query. This gives us 4 different options that we can now set up. So for example, you've got your meta key. This is the key you want to check against. Then you've got your meta value, the value you want to check it for. Then how you want to compare it based upon equal, not equal, and so on. And then finally, you've got the type of information you actually want to filter against. Now, if you want a good example of this, I've already got a video where we're working with dates using the meta query function. So if you want to find out how this works in a little bit more detail, I would recommend taking a look at that video now. It'll show you, at least give you an idea of how you can start using these meta queries. And the nice thing with this is you can stack more of these on top of each other. So once you've created one, you can create another one. You can then set up how you want them to interact with each other, whether they're and or queries. Again, like I say, we'll cover this in more detail in our own dedicated tutorial. But if you want to take a look, check out that video on dealing with dates using the meta query function. The taxonomy query is a similar kind of thing, but this one works with taxonomies as opposed to meta information. Now, if you're not sure what meta information is, it could be things like the title, the content, the featured image, or it could be custom data like custom ACF fields, those types of things. Whereas your query for taxonomies is how you organize things when you create a taxonomy. So for example, when it comes to WordPress, your tags and your categories, they are taxonomies. So if we open up the taxonomy query, you can see inside there, we've got a similar kind of setup. What taxonomy do you want to check against? So for example, we've got the categories, which is the native function inside WordPress. You can then choose what you want to check against, the term, name, slug, and taxonomy term ID. So for example, we may want to check against the name. Then you can choose what terms do you want. So you can use the terms from dynamic data, or you can type them in yourself. And then you can choose whether to compare them using in, not in, and so on. And the same thing then for if you're working with children. So if you've got that hierarchical setup, whether you want to include them or to exclude them. Again, probably a little bit more detail than I want to go into in this sort of foundational video, but we will look at those in more detail later on. Next up, we've got some other options for how we want to deal with the overall loop. Your infinite scroll, so if you want to have this to load in as you go down the page, so we may start off with 6 example posts, and then you want to scroll down the page and it automatically loads in the next bunch of posts and so on. So you get that infinite loading kind of thing. Well, you can use this by using the infinite scroll. You can enable it and you can set an offset inside here as well. We'll disable that for now. If you're using the live search function, you can use this alongside the actual query loop as well. So you can see we've got how we want to display the live search results. Again, we'll take a look at searches and filters and things in their own dedicated video to go into that in more detail, working in conjunction with the query loop. Then if you are using the infinite scroll and using the Ajax loader, you can choose what animation you want to use from a range of different animations. So you can feed back to people that something's actually going on when they're scrolling down the page and things are loading in. Finally, you've got the no results option. So what you can do here is you could create something on the page itself, or you can just create a simple template to say there's no results, whatever you kind of want to put a little error message, links to other pages and so on. So if you create a new category or taxonomy or something, and then someone goes to it, there's no results, this is what they'll see. So you can set this up, and then you can use this any way you want in any query loop. So I've created one called no results template. I can choose that from the list, and now that will always be used if there are no results displayed for any of the query loops we create. Finally, you've got this global query loop. You can basically ignore that because that's not part of the standard query builder as part of Bricks. That's part of an additional plugin. So ignore that. You won't see that unless you have Advanced Thema installed and activated. So that's how you create a query loop. And that's one really simple example. I'll show you another example in a moment how we can use this to create a media loop, which is quite cool if you want to create a gallery of images. But before that, let's take a quick look at the pagination options, which come in incredibly handy when you're working with creating loops with lots and lots of posts. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this card design down, close our container, and we're going to add a second container in. We'll make sure that's positioned in the right place, which needs to go by here. And this container is going to contain our pagination. So let's just rename that. There we go. It's always good to name things. And from there, we're going to just choose the pagination option, and we're going to come over to the plus for our elements, type in pagination, include that. Open up our pagination. You can see there's our pagination, no results because it doesn't know what it's trying to paginate. So what we need to do is choose which query we want to apply this to. You may have multiple queries on a page. You can apply it to the specific query that you want. So for this example, we're going to open this up and we're going to say this is using the card block, but the main query is fine if this is the main query on your page. We'll choose card block for this example. And you can see now that says 1 and 2, and then we can customize the look of this if we want to. I'm not going to go into that because it's pretty simple and self-explanatory. Let's click Save, and let's take a look at our page. Let's open this up. You can see there's our loop. There's our 6 items. Let's click on number 2, and there's the next items we have in our list. So we can see now that our query loop is working perfectly. Want to go back to the previous one? There we go. Simple as that. Okay, let's try creating a different kind of loop this time. Let's create a media loop so I can show you how it's very similar in what you do, but we can use it in various different ways. So let's delete this section. Let's start with a new section. Inside there, we're going to add a block, and inside that block, we're going to simply add an image. There we go. Now, if you're wondering what this is all advanced thema on the right-hand side, but you can access all the exact same information by simply coming to the plus and using these options inside here. I'm just using this because it's quick and easy. Okay, so next thing we need to do is just set up how this is all going to work. So first things first, let's just drop in how this image is going to be displayed and some basic info, and then we'll see how we can use the query loop. So with our image element selected, we're going to come over to the dynamic data on the left-hand side, click our dynamic data and say we want to use the post ID. We leave the values set inside here. That's all perfectly fine. Let's set some aspect ratios. We're going to say 16:9. Object fit, we're going to say cover. That'll do for now. And we're going to come back to our container. And from there, we're going to set this to display grid. We're going to set a gap inside here. Say medium, and we'll say 1FR, 1FR. So that'll put them side by side. So now if we choose our block, what we can do now is we can invoke the query loop again. So let's just choose the query loop option, open up our query loop from here, and now we can set up any values you want. So for this one, we're going to ignore the type, but the post type underneath, we're going to set this to be media. Then what we're going to do is we're going to set what type of media we want to include. So at the moment, you can see it's included basically everything. But what we can do is we can be specific. So we can say image / and for this example, we're going to say WebP, because my logo isn't a WebP image. So we've got a WebP inside there. And then we say how we want to order them. So we can order them by whatever we want. So for example, the ID, set it to ascending or descending. Set the number we want on the page, so we say 6 for example, add your pagination in, all those kinds of good things. And then we can easily come in and we can just customize the look of this. So for example, we'll come into our images and we'll come into our borders, lock those together, and we'll just put some nice rounded borders on there to make them look kind of cool. And if you want to, you can even connect these up then to make them open up as a sort of light box. So what we're going to do is come to our content, link to, we'll say lightbox. We'll choose the size we want. We'll say the 1920 by 1080. Zoom is perfectly fine. And we are done. So now if we save this, preview this on the front end, there's our gallery using the query loop. We can click. We've now created a pretty cool looking gallery, all done using the query loop and a little bit of setup and configuration. So that's the fundamentals of how you get started using the query loop builder inside Bricks Builder. This should give you more than enough information to get up and running and kind of see how this whole process works and start building these for yourself. But like I said, I will be covering things in more detail in their own tutorials and also as part of other tutorials where we use the query loop to build out various different types of designs. Now, if you want to find out more about working with Bricks Builder, you can click this link here to a playlist that's got over 50 videos that'll get you up to speed with doing lots of great things inside Bricks. As always, all applicable links in the description. My name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.